Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Princeton Public Library. My name is Janie Herman. I'm the manager of adult programming, and it is my great pleasure to welcome everyone tonight, both here with us in person and those on the live stream. This event tonight is a collaboration between the library and Labyrinth Books of Princeton. A few housekeeping notes before we get to introductions. Please note that this room is equipped with a hearing loop that pairs with hearing aids using T-coil technology. If you need hearing assistance and do not have T-coil technology, headphones are available. Just raise your hand and one of our staff will bring you some headphones. We kindly ask that you silence electronic devices during the talk and hold your questions as there will be a chance for audience question and answer at the end of the conversation. For those who are logging in on Crowdcast, you can enter questions in the Q&A box or the chat and it will be monitored. And so that's all I have to say from the library, because tonight we are going to have Virginia Harriman from Labyrinth Books to introduce our esteemed guests. Welcome.
Thanks, Janie. Our joint work with Princeton Public Library is so vital to what we do, and we're always so grateful for the talent and expertise of our librarians. And these are always our best events. Tonight, we're celebrating the publication of Heart to Heart by Patrick McDonnell. Patrick will be joined in conversation tonight by John Carlin. John is the executive director of the Red Hot organization, a nonprofit dedicated to fighting AIDS through popular culture. Over the past 20 years, Red Hot has produced 20 albums in a variety of genres and raised millions for AIDS organizations around the world. Carlin is also the founder of Funny Garbage, one of the premier web design and development companies in the US, known for its leading work with media companies such as Cartoon Network, Comedy Central, MTV, and US Weekly. Patrick McDonnell is a beloved artist, an award-winning author and playwright, a loyal and true advocate for animals. He's perhaps best known as the creator of the daily comic strip Mutts, which he's been meeting the daily deadline on since the early 90s. All of his work is so visually delightful, elusive, and self-referential, with deeply satisfying design, punchy punches, live wire lines, LOL funny jokes, and above all, deep compassion for the vulnerable. He's a master of the understated, the beautifully simple, the white space. He's a guy who knows something about nothing. Patrick collaborates with all kinds of people, most lately with the Dalai Lama, who, while not on the panel tonight, is certainly here in spirit. Patrick and John will be speaking about Patrick's beautiful new book, Heart to Heart, which brings the Dalai Lama's urgent plea on behalf of the world's animals to life. Let's get started. John Carlin, Patrick McDonnell. Welcome.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. Hello, everybody. I did a talk recently with Richard Gere. He told a story that when he walks in the room, he wishes everyone happiness. So I'm now going to wish you all happiness. So it's a pleasure being here. I really love libraries. It's kind of partly what made me what I am today. I went to middle school and high school in Maplewood, New Jersey, and I read every book in the local library. It was a lot smaller than this library, but it was just something I got in my head to do, and it did well.
I probably read every comic cartoon book in my library, but that was probably about it.
So the other part, which is the real pleasure of being here today, is I realized when Patrick asked me to do this, that Patrick and I had met 40 years ago. This is the 40th anniversary of us meeting, and the occasion that we met was I curated this show at the Whitney Museum, which was about displaying comics comic strips, comic book art with fine art painting. And it was really the first time anybody had done that. And
John's just had an amazing career. I mean, not only with the Red Hot, but with art. I mean, this show was amazing. I mean, now it seems a little commonplace, but back then, for the Whitney Museum to do a show about comic art was pretty much unheard of.
yeah, as I always joke about my career, I start at the top and I'm working my way down. It was a great show. The most remarkable thing in retrospect about the show was it was the first major museum show that showed graffiti art, which seems like almost impossible now. And I talked Keith Haring into doing his first commercially printed T-shirt for the exhibition.
I have that t-shirt.
That was a lot of money. It's probably worth a lot of money. And it was just so funny in retrospect because Keith was like, no one will take me seriously as an artist if I do a T-shirt. Which certainly things changed. And so partly how Patrick and I met around this exhibition was really at, I think it was literally the same time. This is the front of the Whitney catalog, which was printed as comic book. This is the back. Patrick and his wife, Karen O'Connell, who's sitting here, did this incredible book about Crazy Cat. And in some ways, we were all in that first wave of, hey, wait a second, the stuff that we grew up on isn't just trash. It isn't disposable things that you know. I often say when I teach to my students, the things that they told you that you were wasting your time on when you were young often turn out to be the most important things in your life.
For me, for sure.
So, yeah, exactly.
And you know, it's funny because the idea of now people taking comic art seriously. So when Karen and I did this book in 1984, it was with Abrams Books, and Abrams Books was the greatest publisher of art books, you know, real art. And they were taking a gamble that this was the first time they were going to do a book on a comic artist. And when we proposed this book, the original title was Crazy Cat, the Art of George Herman. And they came back and said, no, it has to be like comic art of George Herman. Go 15, 20 years later, Abrams asked me to do a Mutts art book. And they wanted the title to be Mutts, the Art of Patrick McDonnell. And I said, no. Comic art of Patrick McDonnell. So things have changed since that show.
Yeah, no, and it's fun to look back 40 years or so and how much has changed in that regard. That, I think we knew that this was really important stuff. You just reminded me, I curated a show many years later called Masters of American Comics. And part of the show was at the Newark Museum, and we got to sit on a panel with Stanley Crouch. And the other thing that had really changed was Stanley was sitting there proudly talking about George Herman as an African-American artist.
Yeah.
Which, when this book came out, I don't know, did you write about that?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that
Well, not as deep. I mean, George Herman's just the greatest cartoonist, and I highly recommend Michael Tisserand's book of George Herman's biography. But when we did this book, it was so hard. This was before the internet, so it was really hard to find any facts. But we did get a copy of his birth certificate. It was Creole, and we did mention the book. We didn't go into detail because we didn't have enough information to go into detail, but Michael Tisserand, it's just an amazing book, so I highly recommend that book.
Yeah, the one telling detail for me was that he was always wearing a hat and photographed wearing a hat because he was very sensitive, self-conscious about his kinky hair.
Yeah.
So,
But Crazy Cat for me was just a major influence. I mean, Peanuts was my first influence, and I grew up in the 60s, so Peanuts was everything. I used to read Peanuts every night. And then I think in 1969, a collection of Crazy Cat cartoons came out, which I've never heard of Crazy Cat before. And for that book, it just blew my mind, and to realize that how much, how arty it was, and that it really gave me freedom that you really could do comics about anything. So that was a major influence in my life. And boy, just by luck, there was a gallery in New York City called the Grand Gallery that used to show comic art along with famous artists. And we went to a Crazy Cat show, and I was able to date some of the strips because I had collected old newspapers. And we said off the cuff, we said, oh, there should be a book someday about Crazy Cat. And the gallery called us up and said, we'd like to work with you on that book. I was 24 at the time. I said, sure, I'll work on a book with you. I thought that meant I got to just look at comic and say, pick that one, pick that one. But we actually had to write a book. So that was my first.
Yeah, it was a groundbreaking book. I think it really changed how people thought about comics. The first thing that I saw that made me think about comics as art, and this is a tribute because this guy was a librarian at the Smithsonian Museum. Remember Martin Williams, the Smithsonian collection of newspaper comics?
Yeah.
That to me
Great
was
book. Yeah, that was the ultimate.
the transition where you're like, okay, he really collected those old pages and printed them, and that for me was because it was really hard to see these things when we were growing up. They were disposable, they were thrown away.
But we were kind of lucky too, because they were just starting to, in the 60s, they were just starting to reprint some of those old comics. The Crazy Cat collection, they started, I think probably because of the undergrounds, because I think Bob Crumb had that look, so they found a new audience for those comics. That was my education, reading those things.
I was going to say, that was your other Peanuts, Heron, and Crumb. Yeah. Crumb out of it. So then obviously you've already heard the background. I just wanted to put a little bit of the splendor of Mutts up there. Because I think, what we've been talking about, you have really become the embodiment of, which is not just making comic strips that have an artistic dimension, but really bringing art into the comics. So do you want to talk a little bit about what these things are here and how that's part of your Sunday Mutts practice?
Well, there's a title panel for your Sunday cartoons. And they used to call this the throwaway panel because some newspapers use the title panel and some don't. Recently, I've done like other cartoonists and just have a static, the same panel. But for the first 20 years of Mutts, I used to do a different title panel each Sunday, and I would pick different pieces of art that meant something to me. And actually, this one right here was my first title panel where I did someone else's work, and that was a Basquiat panel, just because I thought he was the greatest, and I thought it'd be fun to do a Basquiat version of Mutts. So that was the first time I did it. Once I did that, I said, oh, that's kind of fun. So, and it became a habit, and I started doing title panels of different.
What were people's reaction to that? Did you get like fan mail? People confused? Did they love it? Did they suggest things to you? Like, I want to see Whistler's Mother, or I want to see American Gothic.
Well, I once got a letter from the Dr. Seuss lawyers. Of all the things I did, the only time I almost got sued, I did a takeoff of the Cat in the Hat. The Dr. Seuss's lawyers were tough. Said, no more of that. Cease from you. But I just enjoyed it. And I think the people got a kick out of it. Sure. Yeah. And I once did a takeoff of Robert Crumb's Big Brother and the Holding Company, Janis Joplin's Cheap Thrills album. And I got to had a correspondence with the guitarist from Big Brother and the Holding Company.
Really?
He's
Still around? He survived?
That was probably 15 years ago, so he was around then.
Cool. So there's another dimension in your comics. So let's just say we both started balancing art and comics and all had a parallel, and we both sort of evolved into social activism and consciousness about things beyond ourselves, shall we say.
Well, for me, the strip really educated me because, I was doing Mutts, and Mutts was started because I mean, not only did I always want to be a cartoonist, but I always wanted a dog, mainly because I was in love with Snoopy. But I never had a dog as a kid, so finally in my 30s, I got a little Jack Russell Terrier named Earl. And I've always wanted to do a comic strip. After getting Earl, I said, I'm going to do a comic strip about my dog. And so I wanted the animals much to be animal-like. I didn't want them to be animals that just were worked on computers and watched TV. Like, most cartoon animals are just people in animal costumes. So I really wanted to keep them as dog-like and cat-like as possible. So I was really trying to see the world through their eyes. And the more I started thinking about seeing the world through their eyes, I realized how tough it was for a lot of animals on this planet. And that started getting more and more into the strip. So this strip in particular, just how unaware of all the life that surrounds us that we're just not aware of, and how it's all sacred and all needs our attention and compassion. So that was a strip I did in 1998 with Earl and Mooch. I did a whole week where they were on a boat, just floating in the water. I think I did that for 2 weeks, just floating in the water for 2 weeks. And this was a Sunday page from that adventure. And then the next slide I did 20 years later. Oh, oops, maybe is it gone? Oh, there it is. So it's just you and me, pal. Yeah, so that sums it up. But
That's the hard thing about talking to artists, because it's like, you don't really have to say anything, because it's in the art.
there, yeah. It's tough to talk about, Mark, it really is. I could talk about Crazy Cat for 2 hours, but it's tough to talk about this.
So that's why I really, and this is obviously a transition into, some of the things you've been doing with, spirituality and transcendentalism, is how did that, you sort of talked a little bit about Earl and drawing animals and becoming more conscious of, the being of animals and the continuity of those things. When did you start sort of thinking of these sort of bigger issues, this sort of spiritual dimension?
Well, for me, comics were kind of my religion. I used to read Peanuts all the time and Crazy Cat. And under all art, there's a spirituality. And in particular, making art to me is a spiritual practice. I mean, it's really a meditation. I feel like the best of me goes on the page. And just the whole process. I mean, athletes talk about getting in the zone, but artists get in the zone. I mean, when you work, it's not there. Time just slips by. You have no idea. You just stay still. You're in the moment. And so that was big in my life, and it's part of the strip. I mean, I think with Peanuts, I got so much comfort and joy from Peanuts. I just wanted to give some of that back. And Peanuts had it. It's funny. I'm obviously going to be talking about the Dalai Lama book. It's one of the best phrases that the Dalai Lama says is. He said, "This is my simple religion. There is no need for temples, no need for complicated philosophy. My philosophy is be kind whenever possible, and it is always possible." And I don't have the exact quote, but Charles Schultz has a quote that, and I don't think he read it from the Dalai Lama, but Charles Schultz would quote something like, "Being kind is my religion." That broke down to just being kind. So, those people influenced me. And then in particular, and I guess that's the next slide, I picked up a book in the bookstore of The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And I don't know how many of you are famous with his book, but I highly recommend his book. And that book talked about being in the present moment, and it really spoke to the artist in me. Like, the Patrick McDonnell, Citizen, still has a long way to go, but the artist in me really understood what he was talking about, because that's where you are when you draw. And what was nice about that book in Eckhart Tolle, he uses nature a lot in his talks about how nature can get you to that place. And in particular, your pets, your dogs and cats. So that really spoke to me. So at one point, I started collecting quotes from him that was particular about animals helping you get to that zone. And I put them together and added some drawings. And I was lucky that my agent represented a woman who knew Eckhart Tolle, and she was able to send him these sketches I did. And she said, well, good luck, because he doesn't really work like that. He wrote me back and said he'd love to do it. So.
See, that's how good a cartoonist you are. You can persuade people. You know, but you said something interesting that I've always loved to talk about with visual artists in particular, all kinds of creative people, is you talked about getting in the zone, but the whole idea of where ideas come from is such a mysterious thing. And I think people that enjoy art are mystified by it, but often artists themselves. So I can understand how you got, some degree of looking at the totality of the world, the spiritual dimension, because where do ideas come from, Patrick?
Deadlines help. But no, that's the meditation part. They come from the universe. You're definitely a conduit. I mean, it sounds corny, but when I write much, I usually, we're in Princeton, but I go to a little park area here in Princeton, and I bring my notebook when the weather's nice. And I just sit there and I'm not gonna get up until at least I have 2 or 3 weeks worth of months. And you have to have a lot of faith in the universe.
Right.
And somehow they come. I've been doing it for 29 years. It's still, sometimes it's still like pulling teeth, but somehow they come. You have to have a lot of faith that things are gonna come. And nothing's better than making yourself laugh. And every once in a while, I make myself laugh. And that's when you realize then you're not writing. How can you surprise yourself with a laugh if you know what you're doing and I don't know what I'm doing?
Well, that's where I, right or wrong, saw the connection with the Dalai Lama stuff. It's being an artist, you have to be open to the universe. You have to let something else in that is different than cooking dinner or paying bills or talking about, the most popular TV show or, whatever, everyday life. So all the artists I've always been fascinated by, because it's not just how are you open to ideas, but how do you do something new? I mean, you took all of these influences, but you did something completely new with them. Your work doesn't look like Herman, it doesn't look like Schultz, it doesn't look like Crumb. It's just
that's strange. That's what makes art fascinating. Even when I was a kid, they would always say, don't copy people, find your own voice, whatever. And somehow you do find your own voice, and the Dalai Lama book for me came along at the right time. I mean, I feel like my whole life was building up to that I could handle this book. I mean, it was a little scary to sit down and do, but I also knew that, this is why I'm here, this is what I want to do, so.
Yeah, so the obvious question, now that we're on this slide, is how did this go about? How did you collect these sayings? Why did you think, I should do a book with the Dalai Lama?
And it's another one of those incidences of it being a small world. I was on the board of the Humane Society of the United States, and a board member and a friend of mine decided he was going to plan a trip with his friends in San Diego to Africa. And he called me up and asked if I would like to be part of that. And boy, Karen and I had the pleasure to go to Africa like 15 years before, and it's just an amazing trip. And Karen's been wanting to go back forever. It's tough for me to take 10 days off, it really is. So I always get nervous about it, but Karen said yes right away. So we got to go to Africa.
So you have to be open to your wife, not
Yes, without a doubt. And so in Africa, we were just seeing all the beauty around us. And also, you're really aware of how fragile the planet is, and why we would make this beauty go away is just insane. So one night we were under the stars, talking about how beautiful with my friend Jerry and his wife Pam. And as it turns out, his wife Pam is on the board of the International Campaign for Tibet. And she knew Mutts, and she also particularly knew the book I did with Eckhart Tolle, and really enjoyed that book. And we were talking about how fragile Africa was, and she started talking about how the Dalai Lama's main focus now is the environment. And it was my wife Karen. We said, well, maybe Patrick could do a book like the Eckhart Tolle book with His Holiness on the environment. And she thought that was a great idea, and so when I go back to the States, I'll bring it up to the board. And the board thought it was a great idea, and they said, I just like the Eckhart Tolle book, I took some of his work, writings on the environment, did a few sketches, and they sent that to Dharamsala, and His Holiness and his staff looked at it. And said, okay, they liked the idea.
That must have just been a typical day.
The whole time, anytime I told people what I was working on, I couldn't say it with a straight face. It just seemed like, I said, you're not going to believe this stuff, but and it sounded like I was telling a lie when I was saying it, but like, yeah, I'm working with the Dalai Lama. Yeah, I still can't believe it.
Well, especially, known you for 40 years and a little bit what you did before, like, how does someone go from being in a punk rock band to working with the Dalai Lama?
That was a lifetime ago. That was all spiritual too, in a different way. But I was a drummer in a punk rock band. But so working on it was honored and humbled that I had this opportunity to do that.
They give you a lot of notes?
Yeah, he did give notes. The way it worked was I was reading, God, I must have read 30 books and listening to lectures and trying to put anything that had to do with the environment. And when I did this, I really wanted it to be a story, just not a lecture or quotes. I wanted it to be a story. And one of the reasons is Jane Goodall. Someone asked Jane Goodall, how do you change people's minds? And she said, particularly people in power who are so dead strict, they know what they want, and nothing's going to change them. She said, so I don't try to change their minds, I try to change their hearts. And then the woman said, well, how do you change their hearts? And she said, with stories. I said, that was a great answer. So for this, it's a tough message. The world's not in the best shape, and we have to do everything we can to help it. But I figured if we could make it into a story, it would be a different way to get that message across. So
you want to walk through?
Yeah, I'm going to get on
the slides.
The book just came out, so I'm sure a lot of you don't know the book at all. So I'll do a fast version of it. So it starts off: human use, population, and technology have reached that certain stage where Mother Earth can no longer tolerate our presence with silence. And it starts with a bunch of different places that are on fire with different bears running from the fire. And it ends in Tibet with the panda bear. And if you go back a slide, you can see that his habitat is being destroyed too. So he goes on a pilgrimage to get some answers. And then we see the Dalai Lama in his home in Dharamsala reciting this prayer. And this is his morning prayer. He says this prayer every morning. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector for those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those without light, a place of refuge for those who lack shelter, and a servant to all in need. And then there's a knock on his door. And the panda's there. And he says, I welcome everyone as a friend. And then they go on a talk. They go on a walk into the forest. And they talk about life and the state of the world. And in his talk, the Dalai Lama talks about when he was first picked as the Dalai Lama, he had to travel from his hometown to his new palace. And I think the trip took like 20-something. It was a long trip, by car to get there. And he said the thing he remembered most was all the animals he saw along the way. So I do a bunch of the animals in the book that he saw. And in particular, he talked about peacocks and dancing with peacocks. And this was one of, if you go back, this was one of the only art notes I had. He said, I originally drew the hat I made the too triangular. It was too big. The thing was too big, so I had to make the hat different.
That's just wild, thinking of the Dalai Lama, like, making notes and drawings, right?
Well, I mean, can you imagine? It took a long time for me to try to capture his look. Because, I mean, God, I knew he was going to say it. And, I am definitely not, the greatest realist cartoon, artist, and I'm not the greatest caricaturist. But I think what I'm fairly good at is capturing feelings and emotions. And I was really just trying to go for more that presence. And the thing about the Dalai Lama, I looked at so many pictures, but just the joy that comes from him. I mean, that smile and that so I wasn't really worried about drawing them exact, but I wanted that same feeling to come out. So, and I learned how to draw his hat correctly.
Well, one thing I always loved about comics that is, in general, that is part of that, is comics is a form of expression that embraces the audience. It doesn't really talk down to the audience. And in many ways, what you're saying about your style of drawing, a lot of cartoonists, it's almost like the audience is finishing the drawing in their heads.
Oh, yeah.
And that to me is like a kind of conversion or not a belief system, but it is a kind of communication that's very different than like a fine art approach, which is really like, I'm telling you, I'm smarter than you. What do you think this is?
And I think comics are definitely, audience participation for sure. I'm always amazed. I'm from the less is more school, and this book is definitely part of that. Like how little you need to show for people to get it. I mean, like when I think about Mutts, I drew a couple of blades of grass. There's a round mirror on every wall, that represents in the living room. And there's so little you have to tell, but you still just feel the place. It's more emotional. And then same with the, I love drawing facial, expressions. I mean, I think that's how you tell the story. But another thing I do a lot is show the back of heads, because then the audience, figures out what that face is. And a lot of times I don't draw Earl's eyes or Mooch's eyes. And I got that from Little Orphan Annie, didn't have pupils. That was part of like you had to put the emotion into it. So yeah, I think comics are a great audience participation art.
Well, and also some very famous artists like Leonardo da Vinci did the same trick, right? The Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa, is it smiling? He left things out. There's no corners on the edge of her mouth. So it is one of the great tricks. And what I really meant is that by not having a photorealistic view of the Dalai Lama, everyone reading the book kind of creates the Dalai Lama within themselves, which is the whole point, right?
Well, I agree. I mean, even with comic books, in this generation, there's so many people that draw comic books so realistic and everything's perfect, but it takes away from the story. It takes away from that audience participation. Like, give me a crude, like a 1940 comic of a superhero flying. They really look like they're flying and it's drawn horribly.
Right.
But it just has that life in it, that really super realistic drawing. Usually doesn't have.
I learned that lesson from probably the greatest graphic designer of our age, Milton Glaser. He did the I Heart New York, which everybody's seen. And I heard him say this really amazing, he was kind of like a Buddha-like figure in the art world. As he said, great design is like a little puzzle that the audience has to solve. And he gives these like pleasure. It gives them a kind of happiness. So I Heart New York is like, what does that really say? It's like a little, but then when you solve it, you feel happy. So
It'll stay with you.
it stays with you. It's like a little hook. And I think cartoons, and your cartoons in particular, are doing that all the time, like you just said. You're asking the audience to complete the picture, the scene, fill in.
Yeah, and a daily comic strip is a special thing too, because people see it every day, so it just becomes part of your routine. It's
Right.
almost like a family member. I mean, for me, I felt like I knew those peanuts, I grew up with those peanuts,
Right.
So it's a unique, strange art form that you draw something every day for somebody.
And going back to the history of comics that brought us together, that all these artists, like you being, one of the greatest contemporary examples of, are basically using a crappy medium that wouldn't let you express in this kind of really rich, dimensional way that, let's say, a fine artist would have at their disposal, or a filmmaker or somebody on that scale. These are just lines being printed, pretty quickly.
And pretty crappy.
Pretty crappy. But that to me was always this amazing kind of heroic thing where Harriman, being the greatest example of like, it just doesn't matter. He did something great. He created genius within that debased medium.
Yeah, and it's funny for me, when I did Mutts, I never thought I couldn't do anything I wanted to do, because of her, because of Peanuts, and and Popeye too. My God, the early Popeye, I recommend everyone to read early Seagull. He was doing crazy stuff. And even with all the animal rights things I've done, I never was told not to do anything. I was never, I mean, I also play within the boundaries. I mean, I know when you can too, but I wasn't interested in that anyway. So I always felt like it was a fine medium for me.
But even, like these things, like a book, this is like a pretty old-fashioned, like in a world where everything comes on the screen. A book gets printed in a particular way, and part of the art is understanding the medium.
Yeah, and
Making a drawing like that, which is really about, it's about the Dalai Lama, it's about the environment, but it's also about drawing, printing.
yeah, well, I'm an old-fashioned guy. When you do these books, you're constantly getting, on the internet, on the computer, you're getting versions of the book, and the whole time I had to look at it on the screen, and I was happy with it, but there was nothing like getting it in the mail.
Right.
And holding it, and also it became a book. Like, I thought it looked good on the screen, but in my hands.
See, if that had been a screen, you would have
Yeah,
broken
it would have broken. But, I was really pleased with how this book came out. Like, you always think of what the book's gonna be like, and probably half the time you're a little disappointed how the printing looked or the size of the book or whatever, but this book, I was happy with every aspect of it.
But that's also something I've always really admired in you and a lot of artists who work in the print medium, let's just say, is you're composing for something that is in some ways different and you're not in complete control of. So part of the work becomes understanding that medium, which is a kind of, I think there are analogies in spirituality as well, which is, you're not in control.
Yeah.
You're not, it's not like you're making a painting and the thing you see is exactly equal to what you intended or you were capable of creating.
Yeah, no, until it comes in the mail and you hold it in your hands, you're not sure
Right.
what it's gonna be. And there's a lot of people involved. I mean, the designer, Sean, was just fantastic. My brother helped with scanning and coloring, because this book, I really wanted it to be special. I didn't want it to look like a children's book, so even like the coloring was different than I usually do. And I really wanted to be, less is more. I was trying to have the least amount of art that would tell the message. And this is probably my favorite line in the book. Perhaps one day we would kneel down and ask the animals for forgiveness. that drawing I wanted to make sure I got right. Yet if we have the capacity to destroy the earth, so too do we have the capacity to protect it. Compassion, loving kindness, and altruism are the keys not only to human development, but also to planetary survival. Real change in the world will only come from a change of heart. What I propose is a compassionate revolution. And that's at the heart of the book. You know, it's showing the problem, but then that we have the answer. You know, we all just got a little more empathy, and a little more compassion, and a little more kindness. God, how different the world would be. And that's always been the philosophy of Mutts too, just compassion and empathy. And it sounds so simple, but geez, it's hard for humans. I don't know why. It's hard for humans, but God, can you imagine if everyone was a little more like the Dalai Lama? This planet would be totally different.
Sure. So who do you want to be, or who do you see the audience for this book?
Oh, everyone. I mean, I think kids could read it, and yeah, I just hope I think that the Dalai Lama and his staff, I think what they liked about it, and I know from the International Campaign for Tibet, they just felt like, it's the Dalai Lama's message, but just told in a different way, definitely an accessible way. What I like about the book is in reading and studying up for the book, when you read the Dalai Lama, every sentence he says is so powerful, so important. But when it's just a book of words, it's a lot to take in. But I think what art and comic art in particular does, it makes you stop. It's like there's only maybe 1-2 sentences on every page, and then you have a piece of art. So it forces the reader, especially in this day and age where everything comes at you. So, with your screen, it's constant. But with the book, and with this book in particular, you really can sit with every page, and it kind of forces you to read that sentence. And again, his words are so powerful that each sentence just really stands alone. And so I hope, I know he hopes that a lot of people take this to heart.
Yeah, no, it's not just a world where a barrage of images, signs are coming at you, but it is largely a world defined by irony and cynicism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, when I saw this book, I was like, it's kind of remarkable knowing you as a person that you have reached our advanced age without succumbing to irony and cynicism. Just to have that still within you, and that desire to, and maybe growing within you, to communicate these, profound messages that are, really different than what you get in your daily inbox.
Yeah, but at the end of it, I think that's what everyone's really longing for. And, I think that's, I grew up in the 60s, so I was very young hippie, but I wasn't a hippie, and I think that still stays.
See, I thought you were a punk. I guess they got him out.
When I was a punk, I think there was hippie values with a lot of those punk rockers.
That's probably
But yeah, so that's important to me. And I feel, why do I have this talent? Why not put it to good use and get that word out there? And geez, we do need to hear it for sure.
So, and we have a little bit of time left, and I wanted to just, segue a little bit to talking about, not the Dalai Lama and not halfway around the world or abstract ideas, and really ground this in, we're all people live in New Jersey, probably everybody here more or less lives in New Jersey, and just sort of ground some of those big abstract ideas in what's it like to live now in this particular place. A state which is really on the precipice of the balance of, preserving nature. And there's so many natural and man-made disasters that are forcing against it. So I just wanted to look back for a second. And I thought of this because this is a painting by Asher Durand from the 19th century. And Asher Durand lived in Maplewood, New Jersey, not that far from here. And this is a painting of, in my opinion, the two greatest kind of thinkers in 19th century America. On the left is Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote the famous essay Nature, and to the right, Thomas Cole, who sort of invented, father of the Hudson River School, invented landscape painting in America. And I always thought it was really interesting that the Oxbow, which is Thomas Cole's maybe most famous, greatest painting, was painted in the same year, 1836, that Emerson published Nature. And it just struck me, when I read your book and we started talking about it and talking about, talking in public about it, which is somewhat an uncomfortable thing to do. This painting really came back to me because I thought to myself, well, here's a painting almost 200 years old that's really about the exact same thing. How do you find a balance between nature and culture? Because in some ways, that's how I saw your book and how you took the writings of the Dalai Lama of, we're not going to go back to a natural state. We're not, other than an apocalyptic way. So the real challenge is how do we find that balance? And just to show everybody really quickly what's going on in this painting, this is an actual bend in a river, Northampton, Massachusetts. Doesn't quite look like that anymore, but at the time that Thomas Cole lived, it did. And he made landscape paintings, but he was really interested in allegory, which, going back to your Jane Goodall quote, is basically using stories to persuade people about ideas. So he was someone who was really disturbed at, the right-hand side of this painting, which is cultivated nature, and wanted to contrast it with the left side, which was wild nature, unspoiled. And this felt to me like, the context of your book, but also just where we're at this moment, not just in New Jersey, but in the United States, on the planet. How do we preserve nature? How do we, persuade people that trees are important, animals are important, that we're not, human beings were not put here to dominate and exploit for our own short-term pleasure and profit.
Yeah, well, I'll go back to the first page of the book. I think Mother Nature is going to wake us all up, but we're going to learn the hard way, unfortunately. And you can see that in New Jersey. I mean, we didn't have to wear a winter coat today in February in New Jersey. And hopefully people will understand it. We have to do something. We have to find some kind of natural balance. What gives me hope is I've had the luck and pleasure to meet Eckhart Tolle and Jane Goodall and another person who someday I'm going to do a book with, Byron Katie. And these are very enlightened people, and what always gives me hope is all of them, and they're deep into, especially Jane, what's going on in this world. But they're all so optimistic and hopeful. And whenever I get discouraged, I think of Jane and those people that I figured, boy, with all the knowledge and love they have, for them to still be optimistic, I feel like I keep my fingers crossed and hope that we'll figure this out.
Well, I think making art is in some ways the most optimistic thing. Whether your art is filled with kindness or rage, the fact that you make art and you individually, but many people we know or don't know, that just that act of making art is an act of faith, of commitment to going on, that there's going to be someone out there that's going to laugh at your joke the way you did, or be moved, and really understand it. And that's why, I've always come back to this painting because, one of the things that's really interesting, this painting's in the Metropolitan Museum, so I encourage everyone to go look at it. It's huge, maybe, it might be almost as big as the slide. But there's this little figure in the foreground there, which is the artist himself, pointing the paintbrush to his hat, his forehead. And what I always thought in my mind, I don't know if this is true or not, is that what he's really saying is, this came out of my head. And it's the clue of saying, read it. Try to understand what I was thinking. And it operates on these two levels of like, oh, it's just a beautiful landscape. You could just meditate on it and make you feel peaceful. But there's something deeper in it as well, which is how I would sum up your work in general, which is you could just enjoy the gags and the cute animals and it's kind of fun. But what makes it special is there's something much deeper underneath it in this book and all the things you do.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. And all the great work you do too with Red Hot. We've talked about that. We're at an age where we can get to do things we want to do, and not have to worry about.
Yeah, but we've always done the things we wanted.
Yeah, I know.
We just had to hustle more for money along the way. So I know that we wanted to leave time for questions from the audience, so I figured doing my best to time it. There we go. Do the Oprah thing.
So anybody?
Thank you. I'm just curious. I wondered, how big is the first printing of this marvelous book?
No, I have no idea. I don't pay attention. Karen will know. I don't pay attention to that stuff. Karen, do you know what's the
But
answer?
it must be a big number.
I hope so. Do you know?
65,000.
Oh, how many?
65,000.
65,000.
That's a lot. And maybe you should talk, I didn't ask you this question, I should have, is where will the money from the sales of the book go?
Oh, well, the Dalai Lama's money goes to his organization, his foundation. But I gave all my money to the International Campaign for Tibet, and which is a marvelous organization. You should definitely go check them out. If you go to our Dalai Lama page on Mutts.com, it'll give you information how you can learn more about the International Campaign for Tibet.
Okay, so we have a question coming in from Crowdcast. Bob Reed wants to know, have you had the chance to actually meet or speak directly with the Dalai Lama, or has it been all email and correspondence?
The book was conceived in the early 2019, and we had a trip with the woman Pam, who I went to Africa with. We had a trip planned for November of 2019, and then COVID happened. And it's been put on hold, and actually this April, or either April or May, we're gonna go meet the Dalai Lama. It'd be nice to actually go with the book.
Wow.
Other comments or questions?
Patrick, I have a drawing question, which is, you said a little bit about this, but I'd like to hear more. And that's how you, all of your forms are in your own idiom, and they're McConnellized pictures. But how do you what is the process of getting, say, to representing the Dalai Lama, or an elephant or a giraffe? There must be stages of that, because your forms are very accurate as well, right? Even though they are drawn.
I've had a lot of practice drawing animals, and I like drawing animals. But for this book in particular, I didn't do any penciling. So it's all freehand. sketching. So I did a lot of drawings. I mean, I would draw the Dalai Lama maybe 10 times, as fast as, I'm just trying to capture the emotion. And then I would pick the best one. And same with all the animals, that drawing of all the animals and him kneeling. Boy, I kept my fingers crossed. That was just, just done freehand. And if you look at it, some of them are a little off, maybe the sizes are a little wrong, but it worked. So I'm more worried about the feeling of a drawing than the accuracy of a drawing. So that felt right. So, yeah, the book has a very spontaneous, loose feel to it. That's what I wanted it to have. I didn't have to draw cars and things that are tough to draw. There's no bicycles in the book. But, as an artist, I think it's one of the reasons I like nature. Nature's so loose and free and real. You don't have to worry about those things. So, if you look at Mutts, most of the time they're outside. So it's fun drawing trees and grass. It's, there's no bicycles in Mutts, and there's rarely a car.
Jenny, you got a question?
Yeah.
Hi, the question is, when you draw your Mutts comic strip, do the words come first or the pictures come first?
I'm a picture guy. So when I sit down and have to, it's changed over the years, but now I pretty much do 4 weeks in a batch. So when I have 4 weeks worth of jokes, then I'll actually do them for real. But in my sketchbook, because I'm more of an art person than a word person, so it's usually just funny little sketches and trying to think of where Mooch can be and where, what might happen. So it's usually the art before the words.
Okay, and this is a question again from Crowdcast. Seth on Crowdcast wants to know, and it's gotten voted by several, when will guard dog be freed?
I've been getting this question out for way too long, because I've been promising it way too long. I will say, and everyone should hold me to this, it's gonna happen fairly soon. Finally,
You're going to promise us that guard dog will be freed soon because
Yes.
the internet wants to know.
yes, it's gonna happen soon.
You know where you live.
Well, I'll tell you something that, just a little aside. It was gonna be a Mutts movie, which has been on hold now for about 10 years. And I guess I can talk about that, but in the movie, guard dog was gonna go free. Now that I'm not sure if that movie's ever gonna happen, it'll happen in the comic strips. So I was really kind of getting a kick out of that was gonna happen in the movie, but I'm not sure if that's gonna happen or not.
Thanks for coming, first of all. I wanted to ask you, how did you get started? And were you self-taught? Did you go to school, or is it a combination?
I think I got started, it's funny. Most cartoonists know they're gonna be cartoonists when they're about 4 or 5 years old. And I got started because of Peanuts, and I was also lucky. My mom and dad met at Cooper Union Art School. So as kids, my whole family was encouraged to draw. So I was drawing as early as I could remember and just loved doing it. So I kind of knew I was going to be an artist someday. And I went to School of Visual Arts in New York. So I had some training, but I tell you the truth, I had Will Eisner, the guy who did The Spirit, as a teacher. But I went in school, even though I knew I wanted to be a cartoonist, I was more interested in learning things I didn't know. So I took a lot of painting classes and things that had nothing to do with comics. So I thought at school I should do things I don't know. And I probably felt like I already knew cartoons.
Tell the Village Voice story.
Oh yeah, I just told John. So while going to SVA, I was starting to have a portfolio of work. I said, well, I should go out there with my portfolio and try to get a job. So I went to the Village Voice. And I left my portfolio, went home, and the art director actually called me up and said, I'm going to give you a job. It was the first time I ever paid for a cab myself. I just ran down the stairs of my apartment. I lived in a little cheesy apartment, and jumped in a cab and got right to him and got the job. The job was, I did like 6, 7 drawings, and it was about the angry critic. for this particular issue, they're having all their critics talk about what they don't like. So I did 7 drawings, and then the Village Voice came out on Wednesdays, so I was at my newsstand at 5 o'clock in the morning waiting for that Village Voice to come out. And when it came out, he put one drawing in particular had an angry critic. And he put that drawing on the cover of the newspaper. And then as I was going through the newspaper, he put that drawing on just about every page of the newspaper. So my first job, I was on like every page of the Village Voice. So yeah, that was a really sweet thing that I did.
So you started with anger and you're ending up with peace.
It's
Yeah. We have a comment from online, from Juliet Noonan, who wants you to know that she has hanging up in her room a print of the day that she was, of the Mutts comic from the day that she was born on 10/23/06.
Wow.
That's kind of a really neat idea. Yeah. Thank
I
you for
wonder what
sharing
the
that.
strip, I wonder what that strip was.
Yeah, we don't know. She didn't say. You're going to have to go look that up.
I will.
10/23/06.
Not a question, but just a sense of your work. I've been very fortunate to meet His Holiness and to be in his presence. And I really get the sense, he speaks of himself as being a simple monk. And in all the photos or the paintings, drawings that he's done, you capture that simpleness.
Wow, thank you.
And but also his grandness, because to be in his presence without him saying anything is huge. And I get that through this drawing in particular, but I love how you have the look of the panda to His Holiness is a look that I have felt him doing to other people. So it's just really, quite beautiful. And I have no doubt that he's going to be in the process.
Oh, thank you so much. I've had the pleasure to meet a handful of people that I knew, and they didn't even know they knew the Dalai Lama. But I've talked to a few people, and everyone says the same thing. Just his presence, just like one woman we met, she said, and this was just, she just walked by him on the street in New York, and she said she literally fell to the ground. She just, so.
But you really emanated through everything that you've had, because it is simple. The way you spoke about how you do your drawings and not using a whole lot of stuff, just being right to the point. Even though his words are so powerful and grand, he is very simple in so many ways, and you really depict that, and it's just, it's beautiful.
And and for, the words are powerful and grand, but the message is so simple. Just be kind, for God's sakes. Just be kind. Think about other people. Stop trying to make yourself happy. Make others happy. That'll make you happy. It's such a simple message that we need to hear more. So hopefully that the book will get out and touch a few souls. I hope.
Well, I invite you to come to his residence up in Washington, New Jersey. It's the Tibetan Buddhist Learning Center. And in every August, there's the Maitreya Festival, and where you would be in the presence of many of the monks that he has worked with.
Definitely talk to me after this.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
It would be a great place for you to bring his book also, your book.
His book. Any other questions?
Any comments? You want to share? Questions?
Not a question, but I would like to thank you for years ago, you gave me the cartoon of Cecil. And how that famous lion who was shot by that stupid dentist in Ohio. But through your cartoon, you made aware of our brutality and simple behavior. I mean, it's just absurd. You just throw a little piece of meat and then kill this beautiful, beautiful lion, which we had the pleasure of following for 3 days. And he was one of the best daddy and they knew that whole area. He was a royalty. I mean, he was just so magnificent. When you caught in your drawing, and you had simple, straightforward few words, how stupid we humans are.
Amen to that.
I just have a quick question. So what is the age group that has bought most of the books? I'm just curious if there's any idea about that.
You know, that's another good, I don't pay attention to that stuff. I just sit in my room and draw all day and send it out to the world and hope for the best. I know from what my wife tells me on our website, it's 30s seems to be 40, you know, but it appeals to everyone. I don't think of enough, and I don't think any cartoonist does. I mean, in talking to Charles Schultz, I mean, you try to entertain yourself first. That's, you know, and hope that what entertains you will entertain other people. But, you know, when I do book signings, it's all ages, you know, it's all ages. Although, you know, because Mutts is on the internet, you know, that's where I think I'm getting young people, but I know young people aren't reading the newspapers anymore, that's for sure.
Okay, so I think we're over our hour by just a little bit. Thank you everybody for the great questions and for being here. And so we have Labyrinth books here to the side, and Patrick will be here to sign the books for you. And thank you, John, for coming down to be our conversation tonight. It's been a great pleasure to have both of you here in Princeton. And Patrick, we're going to look forward to seeing pictures of you with the Dalai Lama upon your return. And it's just been so wonderful. And so thank you, everybody. Good night to the internet.